Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Chair. All right, so this morning, I just wanted to share a few views with you all on the theme, examining the levels of human capital development in Trinidad and Tobago. So as we go through the presentation, firstly, we will try to examine the local labor market in an attempt to determine the levels of human capital development within the local economy. Secondly, we'll examine the historical context of human capital development in Trinidad and Tobago, trying to determine whether or not the current trends have been new trends or have been traditional trends. And thirdly, we'll try and put forward certain proposals and recommendations for the way forward as we try to improve and increase the levels of human capital development within our country. So firstly, we're looking at the labor market to determine the levels of human capital development. Firstly, we will look at the labor force by sector. So this table here showing us examining the labor force by sector, so showing us what percentages of the labor force are employed in specific sectors or industries for the years 2006 to 2009. So if we look at the table, to try and identify the larger percentages, to try and identify in which sectors are the majority of the labor force employed. Let me draw attention firstly to community, social, and personal services, where we see for the 4 years the percentage is around 30%, where 30% of the labor force is employed in this sector. The other larger ones would include construction and then wholesale, retail, trade, restaurants, and hotels, where these percentages are just under 20%. So, and then let's look then at the smaller percentages, where a smaller portion of the labor force is concentrated. In which industries? We could look at, for example, petroleum and gas. So we see for the 4 years it's just about 3%. And then we could look at finance, insurance, real estate, and business services, fluctuating but just under 10%. So what we can say there is that there's a concentration of the labor force in semi-skilled sectors, right? In the lower end then. Then continuing examining the local labor market, we're looking at the labor force by income. All right, so let's try and see where is the concentration. So let me draw attention to the monthly income group, the ranges of $2,000 to $2,999, and then $3,000 to $3,999. That's where the concentration is, and it's important to note, if we look collectively at below $4,000 per month, when we sum up those numbers, that actually gives us, for 2005, 61.43%, for 2006, 59.34%, and for 2007, 53.29%, less than $4,000 per month. So that tells us that for this period, just over half of our labor force has been earning less than $4,000 a month. So I think that's important to put into context. Continuing examining the local labor market, and we're looking at the labor force now by educational attainment. Again, let's try and see where there is a concentration. And without a doubt, the concentration within the labor force is below tertiary education. So the majority of the labor force has an educational attainment that is below tertiary education. And this is in different categories. And these categories include secondary no subjects, secondary no subjects plus training, and those kinds of categories. And I also want to highlight here that collectively, when I sum up the labor force, the two categories, secondary no subjects and secondary no subjects plus training, that gives us 25.2% for 2005, 25.6% for 2006, and 25.6% for 2007. So in other words, that tells us that just about 1/4 of the labor force for this time period has attained educational attainment, but has left secondary school without subjects, without a full certificate. Indeed, a gloomy prospect. So summarizing these trends, having looked at the labor force according to income, according to sector, and according to educational attainment, we could draw the following conclusions. Firstly, there's a concentration with respect to sectors in terms of unskilled and semi-skilled sectors. Secondly, when we look at income, there's a concentration in the lower monthly incomes. And when we look at educational attainment, there's a concentration towards lower levels, below tertiary education. So what these trends point to is the fact that within the local economy, the levels of human capital development is relatively low. Having established that, there are other realities that we need to consider. So we have a relatively low level of human capital development. However, we also have higher enrollment levels in tertiary education at this point in time. So for example, from 2001, enrollment of the student population into tertiary education has increased fivefold. So in 2001, 9% of the student population was enrolling into tertiary education, but now in 2009, 2010, that is now 45%. Additionally, within recent times, we have seen significant public expenditure on education and training. For example, with respect to the GATE program, there's been total expenditure from inception of $2.5 billion. Secondly, education and training continues to receive a significant share of the allocation within the national budget. For example, for the 2010-2011 fiscal package, the allocation for education and training was $8.325 billion. So the reality is that what the data points to is a lower level of human capital development. However, at the same time, we have higher enrollment levels, and we also have higher public spending on education and training. So that is the situation as of today. However, the question is this a new phenomenon, or has this been traditional to have lower levels of human capital development? And historically, what we'll say is that the local economy, as well as the economies of other Caribbean countries, have been predicated on the use of cheap labor for the production of goods for export. And these export goods traditionally have also been of lower levels of value added. So what that points to is the fact that the emphasis and the priority has never traditionally been on promoting human capital development. So improving the skills and capacity of workers has not traditionally been the emphasis or the focus. Today, modern Caribbean economies, in large part, are still structured according to this model. So the result is that human capital development continues to suffer, as the data we recently looked at pointed out. So having established that within Trinidad and Tobago today, the levels of human capital are relatively low, and this has been a traditional phenomenon, let's talk about what we can do going forward as we seek to improve levels of human capital development. So this current situation needs to be reversed, and human capital development needs to become a priority. Now, as we increase levels of human capital development, what we're going to see happening is that the labor force then becomes more trained and more skilled. And as that takes place, the tendency then would be for a shift then towards employment within the skilled sector, for example. And as workers are now employed in this sector more than within the semi-skilled or the unskilled sector, we'll see now a shift away from the lower end jobs. So that will then tend to a shift upwards in the levels of income being earned, as less workers are now concentrated within these lower end jobs. And as workers continue to increase their level of income earned, that then would tend to translate into an increased standard of living of individuals. And when across the board we have individuals experiencing an increased standard of living, that could then translate into increased national development within the economy. So how can we achieve that? Firstly, this could be achieved by developing and implementing a specific industrial policy. So the current situation where we have lower levels of human capital development, as the data showed us, despite the fact that we're seeing increased enrollment figures, and despite the fact that we're seeing increased public spending towards education and training, what this suggests is that there seems to exist a misalignment between skills and the demands in the labor market. And as Dr. Thomas shared with us this morning, well, his phrase was a mismatch between labor supply and labor demand. So if we were to firstly develop and secondly implement a specific industrial policy, what we're doing is targeting a specific industry for growth and development. For example, the policy could be to increase tourism within the Latin American market. So when we have clearly identified the sector for growth, what we are then able to do is identify the specific job needs within that sector that need to be filled. So then when we have done that, we can clearly identify what training we need to provide. For example, if it is we need to develop the tourism sector towards the Latin American market, we then need more tourist guides who have Spanish language skills. We may need more chefs for hotels, that kind of thing. So we've clearly identified the positions which we need to fill. So then we can easily identify what skills we need to provide to train these people. So that is how having a specific industrial policy can assist in increasing human capital development and we will see a decrease in this mismatch then, reducing that gap. Secondly, as we strive towards increasing the levels of human capital development, what we can promote is increased training and retraining at the workplace, because training is not or ought not to be restricted and limited to institutions, schools, and academies, and that kind of thing. And when we train at the workplace, what's going to take place is that we're training persons for existing positions. So we're clear in our minds what skills are required and what training ought to be provided. So once again, we're reducing that situation of a mismatch within the local labor market. And these programs at the workplace could include apprenticeship programs. And training at the workplace, again, would not only be limited to traditional sectors. So we're not only talking about creating more lawyers and accountants, but we're also talking about increasing training in non-traditional sectors, such as culture, for example. So let our Calypsonians and Panmen be trained in music education, reading music, and those kinds of things, which also would have an impact for economic diversification, as we look to other means of generating income within the local economy. Additionally, having firms involved in education and training would serve to create a shift, because firms now will not only see themselves as facilitators of a production process, but also as contributing to increased skills and capacity and training of the workers. And then that creates the situation for us to promote human capital development and for human capital development to become a priority. So just to sum up what I've shared with you so far. Firstly, we identified that within the local economy, the levels of human capital development are relatively low, despite the fact that we're seeing increased enrollment and despite the fact that public expenditure towards education and training has been relatively high. But this lower level of human capital development is not necessarily a new phenomenon. However, it has been a historic trend within the local economy and as well as within the region. Without a doubt, this trend of lower human capital development needs to be reversed. And as we reverse that, and as we promote human capital development, we're improving the standard of living of individuals, and we're promoting increased level of national development. And we can seek towards improving human capital development within the local economy by developing and implementing a specific industrial policy, and also by increased training and retraining at the workplace. And with respect to retraining, because it slipped me to mention before, that retraining is important because it's important to keep workers abreast of the newest technologies and methods and that kind of thing, as we ensure that the productivity levels remain sustained, and also we ensure that the output that we're producing is a marketable commodity. So I thank you for your attention, because this is what I have to share on human capital development.